Any questions for Yury on his very, very interesting presentation?
Margaret, can you signpost where we might be able to find out a little more about business-driven action learning, please? Thank you.
Well, it's not self-advertising, so I didn't set this question up.
I am not applied. Well, I look like a daffodil.
Well, I had the privilege of working with the late Lex Dilworth, and we put together 2 volumes. One which is on action learning history and evolution, where I did most of the work on just the historical background, the intellectual background of Revens's life and so on. And in the Blue Book, Action Learning and Its Applications, we asked the various authors to make contributions, and that's where I explained business-driven action learning. We have action learning in the military, action learning in education, action learning in healthcare, many authors, including Martin Weisberg and others, action learning, action research, what is the difference, what are the similarities. So you'll find it in the Blue Book, but it's so expensive I wouldn't recommend you buying it. If you wish to have a copy, I can most likely send a kind of a non-book version for those who'd like to see. And I have an article coming up in Mike Pedler's book, 4th edition book, which will be out in December, Action Learning in Practice, where I talk about what is business-driven action learning today. Essentially what I've tried to do with business-driven action learning over the years is take the best of the kind of Americanized version, which I started with. I worked with GE and many other companies on this American task force orientation to what was called action learning. But over the course of several years, I became dissatisfied as to the fact that there wasn't a deeper context of this, which meant essentially also work on personal challenges, not just organizational business challenges. So I made it my purpose to try and combine the best of both worlds. The traditional action learning sets, which look at personal, what I call PC challenges, and BCs, which are business challenges, or OD-related type approaches to that side. And it's a combination of and. So I took my cue from, first of all, being very frustrated and not knowing action learning in its true depth. And that's when I started to read the literature. I came to see that even the chronological details weren't clear. Revens was a person who was rather modest on occasion, and he was not really inclined to give precise dates. And sometimes precise dates make a big difference in terms of understanding a human being's evolution, and never mind the movement. So I set out to do this in this orange book, where I kind of did it year by year practically. And I've uncovered many things, some pleasant, some unpleasant, but there is at least a clarity now, I hope, of the multi-layered influences on him, and also vice versa too. For example, many of us take his phrase, there can be no learning without action, no action without learning. But that's really a paraphrasing of Kurt Lewin's idea, whom we never met, but there was that kind of influence, of course, as well. And I just discovered a rather tragic, very human story when I went to the Harvard Business School archives to look at George Lombard's papers. George Lombard was one of the deans of Harvard Business School and a very good friend of Revens's. In fact, he tried to get a biography written about Revens in the 1980s. But Revens describes the relationship as a personal one, which it was. But he also said that his intervention, Revens's intervention, led to the faculty at Harvard to rethink their case study approach, at least to debate it. But in this letter I discovered from 1994, George Lombard, as a kind of mea culpa and self-confession, said that he had discussed it with his dean, but he never wrote this memo to the faculty, because there would have been a major change in orientation, which would have required the approval of the faculty, and that would have gone nowhere, so he didn't even write it, except in a small circle of people. And so he confessed to Revens in 1994 that as much as he admired Revens very much, but he didn't have the heart to tell it before. So that had to be clarified too. And there are many, many other aspects. I think most people admired Revens, saw him as very determined, but also someone who's very difficult to work with. In fact, Charles Handy, as I said to someone who said yesterday to me, 2 days ago when I interviewed him, that he greatly admired Revens, but was very scared of him, very frightened. Because he could, as it was correctly described, he was the bitterest of the gurus of the UK. So sometimes it wasn't a pleasant thing to be around someone like that, which may explain why he didn't have more of an impact in the UK. He claims it was partly because of his CND activity, so he was seen as a communist and so on. But the best description of him was, I think, by Nancy Foy, who said, and wrote an article about him saying, the maverick mind of Reg Revens. And this is why, I think she put her finger on it, I think, but also explains why we shouldn't take what he thought about simulations, what he thought about computers, that seriously. Because in the end, what Revens was about was making sure people and community and deep values were at the center of our activity. And I think he would have probably supported all these new technologies if he saw it as a humanizing and a deepening process of community building, and also if it supported the values that he grew up with of community justice, equality, spirituality, and things like that. So thank you. Thank you for asking the question. I'm sorry the reply was a bit long.
Any other questions for you? Ruth?
Your book exposes a fascinating link between Revens and Quakers and his use of Quaker processes. And what do you think, and what's your own view about the fact that he didn't really ever credit the Quaker meeting for clearness as a big influence on him?
He didn't credit a lot of people, except the ones who were already dead, like Plato and Aristotle and Confucius and Buddha and so on, which was this is a human being, I guess. Right? But I found I don't think at this stage I believe he was a member of the society. And I've talked to Sir Adrian Cadbury, and I've corresponded with all kinds of people who are, even Grigor McClellan, who was the head of the one from Manchester Business School, was a conscientious objector, and still is a Quaker, of course, and many others. And Wiley at the National Coal Board. They all felt that Revens was more Buddhist than Quaker. And the only indication that I had was Albert Barker telling me sometimes Albert, he still remembers a few things about that era that Revens passed on to him. It's never written down. But he remembers that Revens told him that he went to the society meetings in Cambridge with Eddington, Arthur Eddington, who was at the Cavendish Laboratory, well-known Quaker, and the one who proved Einstein correct in terms of his experiments with the sun and with the other things like that. So that caught my attention right away. And when I went to the society there in Cambridge, and I saw and talked to some people, I began to see the very deeper link in the values. His mother and his family were called nonconformists, and they were very proud of the fact. They thought Hollywood movies were work of the devil, things like that. And the more and more I saw the connection, being born in Portsmouth, his mother being deeply involved in healthcare and voluntary healthcare. His brother, that he never talks about, who was knighted, was a little bit older than him, was deeply involved in healthcare, was a diabetes specialist, and so on and so forth. And I began to see all these different things as pacifism, and I saw the connection. And that's what led me to see that there was a connection even in the Clearness Committee between him and the whole set idea as well, even though he did not invent the set. But his experiences were so varied and synthetical in their thinking, that he was able to use that experience as well. So that led me to that, and the more and more I got even deeper involved, I'm not have to prove a few things, which was he truly a conscientious objector in World War II? He seems to have been. He was in the emergency services up until after the Blitz, but he was also in the coal mining industry, because that was also a place where conscientious objectors had a choice to work in. And so he did live in the mines, as correctly said, but clarity is still not there for me. And that's where he lived with the miners and developed his ideas from the miners about partners in adversity. Because he said at the end it was Holdsworth and these other people who taught him what it meant to be in small, as dutiful groups, not sets, but small as dutiful, and that miners taught themselves through their own commitment to sharing their dilemmas and problems. So from all this led to all these different things. But formally never a member, that's for sure.